The light inside the studio was dim, that soft, golden kind of light that clings to dust and memory. Outside, the evening rain brushed against the glass like a gentle percussion. At 80, Paul McCartney sat quietly behind a piano, his hands hovering above the keys but not pressing them. For a man who had spent his life surrounded by sound, it was the silence that now spoke the loudest. He looked older, yes, but not defeated. His voice, still calm, carried the trace of Liverpool's working-class rhythm. "There are 5 moments in my life," he said slowly. 5 people, really, who broke something inside me that I never managed to repair. He smiled faintly, the way one smiles when confessing something to the past rather than to the world. The room seemed to hold its breath. McCartney had spoken of love and loss before, of Lennon, of Linda, of music and mortality, but this felt different. This was not nostalgia, it was reckoning. "People think betrayal only happens in love," he murmured, looking down at his hands. "But sometimes it's faith, sometimes it's friendship, sometimes it's yourself." For decades, he had been the face of joy, the optimist in a band that redefined history, the man who sang about yesterday as if it could be saved. Yet behind every song, there had always been a quiet sadness, the kind that doesn't scream, only lingers. Tonight, under the muted light, the legend was gone, and only the man remained. Older, softer, haunted, but still searching. 5 betrayals, 5 faces, and one question that had followed him through every melody, every silence. Can the heart ever truly forgive what made it human? Long before his songs filled stadiums, before his name became a synonym for melody itself, Paul McCartney was just a quiet boy walking the rain-soaked streets of Liverpool. His home on Forthland Road was small, the wallpaper fading, but there was warmth there, the kind that hums beneath modest lives. His father, Jim, played the trumpet on Sundays, his fingers heavy with age but his rhythm still steady. His mother, Mary, a nurse, moved through the house with a gentle authority, her presence both comfort and compass. The air often carried the faint sound of her humming, a tune that seemed to promise the world would always be kind. Then one day, it wasn't. Paul was 14 when she died. The morning was ordinary, the way all tragedies begin. By evening, she was gone. Complications, the doctors said. What he remembered most wasn't the words, but the silence that followed. The lights were off in the kitchen, he later recalled. I realized she wasn't coming back. That silence became a wound, and within it, a truth he never unlearned, that love can vanish mid-sentence, and that even the purest trust can collapse without warning. His father tried to hold the family together with routine, morning tea, long walks, old jazz records spinning on the gramophone. Paul would sit by the window, notebook in hand, sketching words he couldn't yet sing. Music became the bridge between the living and the lost. Every melody was an attempt to speak to his mother again, every chord an echo of the warmth he missed. At school, he found another boy who understood loss, John Lennon. John's mother had also died young in a car accident. The two of them connected not through ambition, but through absence. They spoke in riffs, in rhythm, in unspoken grief. Their friendship wasn't built on laughter alone. It was built on survival. Even then, Paul's eyes carried a kind of guarded kindness, a boy who gave easily, but believed cautiously. The world would later call it British composure, but it was something else, the early wisdom of one who had learned that joy and pain are never far apart. From that wound grew his greatest gift, the ability to make beauty out of loss. Yet hidden inside every melody he wrote was a quiet fear that one day the music would stop and the silence would return. By the time the 1960s dawned, Paul McCartney was no longer the shy boy from Forthland Road. He was standing on stages that trembled under the weight of screams. Alongside John Lennon, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr, he had helped create a sound that would rewrite history. The Beatles weren't just a band, they were a pulse, the heartbeat of a generation that believed music could change the world. Paul was the melody of that heartbeat, disciplined, perfectionist, endlessly creative. While Lennon brought fire, Paul brought form. His voice carried both tenderness and resolve, a strange fusion of sorrow and optimism. In every song you could still hear Liverpool, the longing of a boy who had learned to find light in the dark. But with fame came a new kind of loneliness. Millions loved him, yet few truly knew him. He once said, "When you're in the middle of all that noise, it's amazing how quiet it feels inside." The world saw only the brilliance, the tuxedos, the limousines, the laughter. They didn't see the nights when he sat alone after the shows, staring out of hotel windows as fans screamed his name below, feeling the echo of his mother's absence grow louder in success. Stardom gave him everything, but it also took away anonymity, the fragile cocoon where he had once found safety. There were cracks even then. Creative tension with Lennon began to brew, not out of hatred, but from love twisted by ambition. Two souls who had once mirrored each other now stood divided by the very dream they'd built together. Paul would later call it brotherhood and heartbreak rolled into one. Their partnership, once so natural, became a battlefield of pride and exhaustion. And yet, the music kept coming. Yesterday, Eleanor Rigby, Let It Be. Songs drenched in melancholy and grace. Each one felt like a confession wrapped in melody. He had turned pain into poetry so perfectly that no one noticed it was bleeding. Then came the end, literally and symbolically. The Beatles broke apart in 1970, and with them, so did a piece of him. The boy who once wrote songs to heal his grief now had to face the loss of his second family. This time, not to death, but to betrayal, misunderstanding, and the weight of fame itself. When the dust settled, Paul tried to start over. He formed Wings, married Linda, built a new rhythm from the ruins. But something in his eyes had changed. The brightness replaced by caution. He still smiled, still played, still wrote about love. But deep down, he had begun to understand what success really costs. Not money, not exhaustion, but trust. Every applause hid a question, and every song carried a shadow. The man who once believed music could heal anything was beginning to learn that some wounds don't want to be healed. They only want to be remembered. Fame, as Paul McCartney would learn, doesn't end when the lights go out. It lingers like an echo you can't silence. In the years after the Beatles disbanded, his life became a strange mixture of freedom and fragmentation. The man who had once stood at the center of the world now found himself surrounded by lawsuits, criticism, and the slow erosion of the friendships that had once felt eternal. The first blow came from within, the legal battle that followed. The Beatles' breakup was brutal, not for its money but for what it revealed. Paul had filed suit to dissolve the band formally, believing it was the only way to protect their legacy from mismanagement. Yet to the public, it looked like betrayal. "He destroyed the Beatles," the headline screamed. For years, he became the villain in a story he had helped write. He smiled in interviews, but every smile carried a weight. The pain of being misunderstood by those he had loved like brothers. John Lennon's words in the press cut deeper than any journalist could. "He's not the man I knew," Lennon said once. And those words followed Paul for years. Beneath the public arguments and pride, there was still love, but love buried under too many unspoken apologies. When John was killed in 1980, Paul said almost nothing to the cameras. Just a quiet, broken sentence. "It's a drag, isn't it?" People mistook it for indifference, but inside, he was shattering. Guilt had found him again. Not for what he said, but for all the things he never did. Then came more loss. His mother first, then Lennon, and 2 decades later, his wife Linda. She had been his anchor, the calm after every storm. When she died in 1998, the silence returned. The same one from his childhood kitchen, the one he had spent his whole life trying to drown with music. This time it didn't go away. Fame could resurrect his image, but not his trust. Every headline, every betrayal, every loss had taught him the same cruel lesson, that love is eternal only in songs, not in life. And yet in the quiet after each fall, he kept returning to the piano. Because even when trust was gone, melody somehow remained. 5 faces, 5 wounds, 5 truths he never stopped carrying. When Paul McCartney finally spoke about them, he did so without anger, just the tired honesty of a man who had lived long enough to see how betrayal shapes the soul. They weren't enemies, he said softly once. They were just people I trusted too much. The first betrayal came from fame itself. In the beginning, it had been a dream, applause, devotion, immortality. But fame has a cruel rhythm. It gives before it takes. The same world that crowned him the voice of a generation soon began to devour his every flaw. His kindness was labeled arrogance, his ambition greed. Even his grief was misinterpreted, turned into headlines. I learned that fame doesn't love you back, he said. It only pretends to until it finds someone newer to adore. The applause that once lifted him now reminded him of how far he'd fallen from the boy who just wanted to make music. The second betrayal was friendship. In the early days, the Beatles were more than a band. They were brothers. But brothers can break each other in ways strangers never could. As the group dissolved, what began as creative disagreement became resentment. Lennon and McCartney, once inseparable, now stood on opposite sides of the same dream. Harsh words were exchanged, letters written, songs turned into veiled messages. Yet beneath it all, Paul's affection never died. When John was killed, forgiveness came too late to be spoken. For years, Paul replayed their last phone call in his head, wondering what he could have said differently. That was the kind of betrayal that doesn't come from cruelty, but from silence. The failure to speak before it's too late. The third betrayal was love. Linda had been his sanctuary, his partner in both art and solitude. Her death tore through him like a second adolescence of grief. He remarried later, hoping to fill the emptiness, but the world watched that union crumble in public. Lawsuits, tabloids, accusations. The private tenderness of his life became theater for strangers. He had always believed love could heal anything, but now he knew it could also wound in quieter, sharper ways. Through disappointment, mistrust, exhaustion, you can fall in love more than once, he once said, but you only believe in it the first time. The fourth betrayal came from the industry itself, the machine that had built him. For decades, he fought to reclaim his music rights, watching his own songs. The very pieces of his heart belonged to corporations instead of him. To see Yesterday, Let It Be, Hey Jude, songs born from his deepest places, treated as business assets was a slow-burning agony. They took the songs, he said once, but not what they meant. Yet even in victory, when he finally regained partial control, the joy was tempered by fatigue. He had learned that art may come from love, but business never does. And then there was the fifth betrayal, the one that doesn't have a face, himself. He had built walls so high around his heart that even the people who loved him most could only knock, never enter. He distrusted sincerity, deflected with humor, smiled when he was hurting. For decades, he had been the optimistic Beatle, the one who kept the band together, who held the light. But inside, he often felt like an actor performing his own happiness. I pretended to be all right for so long, he once admitted, that I forgot what it felt like to actually be. In his 80s, McCartney finally began to lower the mask. He started painting, spending long stretches in silence, talking to no one but his memories. He played music not for crowds, but for ghosts, for his mother, for John, for Linda. I think, he said, that music is the only place where nothing betrays you. Each betrayal had reshaped him. Fame had humbled him. Friendship had scarred him. Love had softened him. Business had hardened him. And solitude, finally, had saved him. The man who once sang "All You Need Is Love" had learned that love isn't a shield against pain. It's the reason we survive it. And perhaps that is why, after all the heartbreak and all the silence, he could still sit behind a piano, close his eyes and smile. Not because he forgot, but because he remembered everything and somehow still believed in melody. Now, at 80, Paul McCartney no longer rushes to fill the silence. He lives between London and the countryside, surrounded by trees, dogs, and the hum of his old piano. The man who once sang to millions now speaks mostly to himself, in melodies, in sketches, in memories. The noise of fame has faded. What remains is the rhythm of breathing, the soft pulse of a heart that has forgiven almost everything except forgetting. Every morning he still writes. Not always songs, sometimes just sentences. words that drift between reflection and confession. We never really get over things, he once wrote in his notebook. We just learn to hum through them. His handwriting has grown shaky, but the music behind it remains steady. The same boy who once lost his mother, the man who lost his band, his friends, and the woman who steadied him. They all still live inside the music. Each note he plays is an act of remembrance, not regret. He keeps few photographs around, only those that don't need explanation. His daughter's laughter frozen midair, Linda holding a camera, John's half smile in a candid moment from 1964. He doesn't flinch anymore when he sees them. Time, it seems, has changed the pain, from a wound into a weight he carries easily now. When asked if he believes in forgiveness, he pauses. I do, he says finally, but I also believe in memory. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It just means you stop waiting for the apology. The words linger, calm and heavy, like the final chord of a song that knows it has nothing left to prove. As evening falls, he sits once more at the piano, his fingers tracing the same progression he played as a teenager. C, G, A minor, F. Simple, eternal. Outside, the wind moves through the garden, and the air smells of rain and old wood. Can a heart ever be truly mended once it has learned to distrust? Or is the act of remembering a sort of and still choosing to sing the closest thing to healing we ever get? Fade to black.